Hello students. Okay, to run through this particular review of water management strategies worksheet, right? I thought that it would be good if I just give you a little bit of recap to remind you of what you have done for the water chapter so far in term 1 and some parts of term 2. I know that term 2 we focused mainly on GI, and then when we came back after the June holidays we were talking very much about forest. So you might have kind of forgotten why we are talking about water strategies and how do they fit in the larger scheme of things. Okay, so just to jog your memory, if you remember, for the first thing you had learned for the water chapter was in chapter 3. We learned about the physical states of water, we learned about where water can be found on earth, we learned about the different water stores, we learned about how some are on the surface, some is underground, and then we also learned about the hydrological cycle to learn about how water can be replenished, how water is a renewable source, right? Then we also learned about the water budget. Okay, we also learned that when the water budget is not balanced, when we have more input than output, such as the one that we see here, when we have more input than output, we have flooding. And we also saw that when we have more output than input, where the output is higher than the input, we actually have droughts. Okay, so we also learned about flooding, and we learned about droughts, we learned about the water budget as well. And we also learned about the ways in which the ecosystem relies on water, and we also learned about the uses of water. So for uses of water, we focus mainly on the domestic water supply, the domestic uses of water, industrial uses of water, agricultural uses of water. We also look at the recreational uses of water as well. And we also looked at some examples to see how in our daily lives, even though we may not be drinking water, for example, we may not be drinking the eggs, we may not be drinking the bread, right? But the water is a very integral raw material, is a very integral resource in order to help us to live our daily lives. Okay, then after that we looked at ways in which humans' excessive use of water and our very careless use of water may have caused certain problems in our ecosystem, such as pollution. So we can see that there's widespread plastic pollution that affects our coastal areas. We can see how when factories discharge sewage, we have a lot of dead fishes because the water quality drops. And we also see how that when there are a lot of fertilizers being run off, when the fertilizer runs off from the fields, for example, and enter rivers, enter lakes, and then it causes this situation where we call eutrophication. So if you recall, during the lesson I also showed you this very interesting project that was done by a group of Taiwanese students, where they collected water sources from different parts of Taiwan and they froze it to show you how the water quality can be affected. Okay, so if I'm going very quickly and you really cannot remember what I was going on about in the last 2-3 minutes, right, this is a good sign for you to go and revise chapter 3 and chapter 4 so that you prepare ahead of time for end of year and you don't find yourself trying to recall a lot of these concepts only 1 day or 2 days before the exams. Okay, so it's good for you to be consistent and for you to do this regularly. Okay, so coming to our main question today, right, we're looking at how water can be sustainably managed. What are these strategies that we can use to ensure that we can use water for the long term? So we don't only want to use water for, today, tomorrow, next week, next year, 10 years from now. We want to ensure that even our future generations, after we are gone, they still have clean water to use. And this here requires a lot of planning, requires a lot of deliberate effort from not just the government but from individuals as well, to ensure that we use these strategies to help us to have a clean water supply, a sustainable water supply. And these are the 4 strategies that you're required to know. Okay, so from these strategies we want to check your understanding, right, which is why you were asked to do the summary with the fill in the blanks exercise, as well as to answer some of the questions. And from your answering technique, I realized that some of you are either not sure of how to approach the questions, or you were rushing for work, you were just copying whatever looks correct, or you were copying from your friend. Okay, so some of you think that the teachers are not aware that the homework looks the same, but for some of you your answers were the same. Okay, so at this point of time, I hope that you take this seriously so that you're able to understand the reasons why your answers were not accepted or your answers look correct but actually it did not answer the question yet, and figure out how you can meet the requirements. Okay, so for question 1 that was given, this is a picture from the textbook. So I think that when you see a picture from a textbook, you may realize that, okay, the answer must be in a textbook, I'll just copy, but it need not necessarily work this way. So again, very importantly is for you to check out the command word. So I cannot stress this enough. Whenever you look at the question, you must identify the command words, and in this case the command words are two of them here: identify and to describe how this strategy helps to ensure water sustainability. Okay, since it's a 3-mark question, there's only one strategy shown here, so I know that the identify part of the command word is just one word, and the describe how portion is 2 marks. So since they have given you a source and they've identified the source and they told you to look at the source, your answer must be from figure 1. You cannot give answers that are not relevant, answers that are from the textbook but not really answering the question or relevant to figure 1 at all. So very importantly is to read the question carefully, analyze it first before you start doing the question. Don't be in a rush to answer the questions because you have 30 minutes for your TA3 and you have if I remember correctly, 1 hour 15 minutes for your end of year exams. So there's enough time for you to do analysis before jumping in and giving an answer. Okay, so the more important thing is for you to ensure that your answer is precise, accurate, rather than you writing a lot but actually it does not answer the question, it does not make sense. Okay, so that's something for you to learn, is an exam skill. So looking at this question, you may have thought that, okay, it must be one of these 3, right? Because I recognize the picture, I know that the content must be somewhere from here. So let's make sure that the answer fits the question. So here they're asking you what is the strategy that is shown here. Of course, we want to ensure the water quality is maintained to a certain level, right? Which is why the wastewater is not allowed to be released by the industries, and it should not contain any of these harmful components. So what do the countries do to ensure that this is achieved? Actually, the countries implement laws. Okay, so for this example over here, what is the strategy that is used? Is it more of this or is it more of this? So you have to see and match, right? You cannot just give an answer and then thinking that the length of the answer counts for something. You have to check whether it's relevant as well. So for this question, you can highlight the fact that the countries improve water quality, and how do they do that? The method must be clear. So they do this by implementing laws. And what exactly is the law? If you realize that it matches the example you learned about Singapore, the industries in Singapore, they are not allowed to release wastewater in the water bodies without the permission from NEA. Okay, and very importantly, you have to link to how this contributes to water sustainability, because many students talk about this part, you write 2 points about this part, or you overemphasize by describing one by one each of these, how do each of these contribute to water sustainability. But you should make a general statement to show that you're addressing figure 1 as a whole. So this portion is addressed here. Okay, I know I'm going quite quickly, so please pause me if you need to, or you can slow down the playback speed so that you can catch what I'm saying more easily. Okay, so this is for question 1A. Let's look at the next question. Now for the next question, it looks very simple and very straightforward, but actually there are 2 command words within the question. So the first command word here is to get you to use an example, and this example has to be an example from a country. So if you tell me things that are done by individuals, for example, I use a bucket when I am brushing my teeth, or I am reusing the water that I've used to wash rice to water the plant. Yeah, but those are done by individuals, you see. I want something on a bigger scale. So the concept of scale is important here. Something that is done on the country level that affects almost everybody in the country, that is used to reduce the water supply. I don't want to hear individual level examples. For example, I make sure that I take 5-minute showers instead of 15-minute showers. Those answers are a little bit too narrow. I want an example that's on the country level. Okay, so that's very important for you to know, that when you're giving examples, make sure you meet the requirement of the question. So here they ask you to describe how a country can reduce water consumption. right? And there's another thing you have to link to as well. Besides describing how the strategy or the example reduces water consumption, you also have to address this part. So a lot of students, when you're answering the questions, you don't link it back to the question. You're just giving an example, and you don't really rephrase the answer or the content that you got from the textbook to address the key part of the question, which is the thing that is missing in many of your answers. Okay, so as you look at the textbook, you may have realized that there are two key examples done on a country level. One is by Singapore, one is by South Africa. And in this case here, because they only ask for one example, you can only give either Singapore or you can only give South Africa. You shouldn't be mixing the examples, even though it's a 3-mark question. So let's see how we can phrase the answer. Okay, so if I'm using Singapore as an example, you can see how I use Singapore as an example here. I briefly mentioned how the PUB, or the Public Utilities Board, raise awareness and promote water conservation. This is an example, but it's still not clear enough how these help to reduce water consumption, right? So I must go a little bit deeper to show how this achieves that. So how they do so is by raising awareness, by having this thing called the water efficiency labeling scheme. And how this does to raise awareness and promote water conservation is that people who purchase these items, right, they realize that it's more water efficient if it has a higher rating. It has more ticks means that it saves more water, it's more water efficient. So explain how this links to sufficient water supply. So when more people purchase these water efficient products, they pay a bit more to buy products that are more water efficient. It uses less water in the long term. This helps to reduce the demand for water and ensures that there is a long-term supply for water. Right? So you see, it seems very simple, but it requires a little bit more thought and requires you to not just copy from the textbook. It requires you to twist the content a little bit to make sure it answers the question. Okay, let me show you another example. And another example is here. Similarly, again, we're using South Africa, which is a country in the African continent, and we want to show what exactly is being done, right? So new practices are introduced to reduce water consumption, and this is at the country level, national level, because they want to attract tourists to the country. So what are some things that they do? They reduce the water usage by doing any of these here. And again, I have to link it back to the question to show how these methods that are used by the hotel allows us to save water in the long term, ensure that we have enough water supply in the long term, how it helps to reduce the demand of water. Okay, so it's not just about copying the answers. I think I've said this many times. Okay, let's look at the next question, which is question 3. Question 3, again, it looks simple, but there are still some things that students miss out. So this, even though they only have one command word, it requires you to break this down a little bit. There are some key points that you need to identify. Number 1, you can only talk about how Singapore uses technology. So if you talk about USA, you talk about Kuwait, you talk about China, it does not answer the question, because the question only wants you to talk about Singapore, and this has to be about technology, and you have to link it to how this causes us to have sustainable supply of water. Okay, so looking at the textbook, some of you look at page 91 and you realize that Singapore has 4 national taps, and some of you talked about water catchment, imported water. Are these related to the use of technology? Sure, there's some aspects of technology, right? We have to purify the water, we have to ensure that the water is clean enough for consumption. But the two main strategies where we use technology intensively are these two. So the answer could only be about new water or desalinated water. And this requires you to describe it. So if you just state that Singapore uses new water, or Singapore uses desalinated water, you have not answered the command word in the question, which is to ask you to describe. Okay, and it's not just to describe where you give details, you must show how technology is used to ensure we have a sustainable supply of water. So you must show how this water source is sustainable, because firstly, it's not reliant on the weather. It is more weatherproof. We don't have to ensure that we have enough rainfall for us to have water from the water catchment, or we don't have to rely on people around us, right, to sell us water. So this is a reliable source of water supply, which makes it very sustainable. Sustainable means that I can use this for the long term. Okay, next I want to talk about technology. So I can either describe reverse osmosis, or I can describe how seawater is converted into drinking water through the use of advanced membrane technology. Alright, so it takes a lot for you to unpack it, which is why I had emphasized that you need to spend time analyzing what the question is asking for before jumping in. Okay, so to use an example, if I'm talking about desalination alone, I must describe what it is, right? So this is the description. I'm describing how technology is being used for seawater to be converted into drinking water. And how is this process done? Again, another description. Then I link it back to the question like I said earlier. Okay, let me show you another example using a different form of technology. I use new water. How is new water converted into drinking water? I describe a little bit more without going into the nitty-gritty details. Okay, I just need the headers to show that water is clean enough for consumption. And again, I link it to how it is sustainable. Okay, so please pause, do your corrections, and make sure that you take time to understand and to digest the reasons why this question requires a little bit more thought. Okay, let's look at the very last one, which I think is the question many of you kind of struggled with, because from the textbook, the answers are not so straightforward. Okay, so do spend enough time attempting your homework and not just copying from other people, because when you copy from others, you deprive yourself the opportunity to learn. And if you rely on ChatGPT, for example, to give you the answers, then again, you are not exercising your brain to be able to make connections between what you have learned and to answer a question critically. Okay, basically you're outsourcing the thinking to somebody else, and you think you get away with it because you have completed your homework. That's not the goal of education, right? We don't get you to be photocopiers, right? I mean, there's a photocopying machine that's created already. We need you to be thinking people. So when you look at questions, just spend some time to think, right? If you find it challenging, you can discuss, but ultimately your answers should not look the same. Okay, so question 4 over here, coming back to this last question. So for this exercise, the last question here has 2 command words. One here is to ask you to explain why, and from the strategy that's being used, for example, to import water, how does this help us to overcome the lack of water? So from this over here, you can see that we know that the country, I mean, Singapore imports water from Malaysia, right? But does this require to talk about Malaysia and Singapore? So for this question, because they talk about countries quite generically, you don't really have to talk about Singapore, but knowing that Singapore imports water from Malaysia gives you a bit of context, gives you a bit of background, so that you can make some good deductions. Okay, you can think of like reasonable reasons, logical reasons, right? So you can explain why, and you can show how this helps. Okay, so this is a 4-mark question. So if it's a 4-mark question, there are 2 command words. Let's split it evenly, so it's 2 marks and 2 marks. So looking at this over here, you can see how I break down the answer. I write about the reasons first. Why exactly do we need to import water? So some of you said that, oh, they have limited supply of water, full stop. Is that a good explanation? Yeah, I kind of give the very simple background, but you're asked to write this for 2 marks, right? You must give sufficient depth. So it's good for you to elaborate a little bit more. Why do they have insufficient water? So it could be because there's a lack of rainfall, or perhaps there's limited water bodies to collect water from. So for Singapore, I don't think we have a lack of rainfall. For us, we fit this. But in some other places where maybe they are in a drier area, okay, they do need to import water because they simply do not have enough input. They simply do not have enough rainfall. Now the next one is to explain how the action of importing water helps to overcome the lack of water. Number 1, it helps to support the needs of people, right? Because early on when we saw the start of the chapter, we realized that people need water for domestic users, agricultural users, industrial users, even recreational users. So this supports the needs of not just the people, but the industries in the country as well. And not only that, it's a form of additional supplement. So for Singapore, while we do have some water supply in terms of our water from the catchment, we do have water from new water and desalinated water, we don't have enough. So this allows us to have a reliable water supply, especially during the dry season. We have an additional source of water, and you can also say that this gives us time to find more long-term solutions. So this helps us to overcome the current lack of water. Okay, so at this point I will pause here, and when you are done doing your corrections for this, please go ahead and look at the other videos if you have not done so, and use this opportunity to revise for your TA3. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. If you have questions, please reach out. Thank you.